Alan has over 35 years experience in all spheres of information technology. He has spent over 25 years in leadership positions. He is an internationally certified privacy consultant and has the DAMA CDMP certification and training on various aspects of data management. His focus is on assisting organizations understand and develop programs for data and information governance and data privacy, including all aspects of planning, education, development of frameworks, policies, processes, and practical implementation. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give Alan a warm round of applause.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you. I hope that my focus is not too far away from what you were expecting. And if I do repeat what anybody else has spoken in terms of frameworks or just affirm what they've spoken about, I apologize, and I'd like to politely ask if anyone does want to throw anything at me that you sit closer toward the back. So just a little bit of background from about myself and the company that I represent. My company is called Data Horizons. We're a specialist consultancy in the areas of data strategy, data governance, data privacy and protection, data management, and AI governance. And I was listening with interest when you were talking about different types of models and credit risk scoring and so forth. I've just this week been presenting to some legal experts on the new topic of AI governance. So I'll bring a little bit of that into today's discussion. I'm also working with an organization called Senfree. You might have heard of them. They're a non-profit that works primarily, well, they've got projects in South Africa, but my involvement is in the Rwanda Economic Development Program, where we are working with government to make better use of data to inform better policy decisions. And my role is then to work with, I'm working currently with 6 of the ministries where we are building out strategies and data governance and data privacy programs. So those are the areas I specialize in. If you have any questions about data protection or privacy, I'm very happy to work with you or to answer your questions. Okay, so yeah, and the other thing I just wanted to mention is that we're also a training partner for the International Association of Privacy Professionals. Data protection is a big, hot topic these days, a lot of confusion around it, and so we work with organizations to demystify that and work around how we can make better use of data. And lastly, I was asked by the Rwandan government to write their data sharing policy, which is currently before their cabinet, and that also works on how to effectively share information between government organizations to promote better policy and decision making. So today I've been asked to speak to you about frameworks. So the title that was given to me of my talk was a very, very long one, so I tried to just keep it a bit shorter. And I'm hoping that what I'll impart to you today is just a practical view on how you can develop your own frameworks for managing cybersecurity risk, for data governance, for data privacy, and we'll also touch a little bit on risk and AI governance. If you think of the different challenges that face us as organizations today, sorry, this is moving to bend. I'm sure some of this keeps you awake at night. If you think of malware, ransomware, phishing, spear phishing, whaling, yeah, you might not have heard of all those terms. So that's in the cybersecurity space. And then from a data governance perspective, some of the aspects that the previous speaker spoke about. So data quality, missing data, poor decision making based on badly managed data. If we think of the data privacy side, the risk of data breaches, the risk of fines, of having the regulator come and visit you and tell you they'd really like to do an internal probe on your organization and its practices. And then we've got the whole new world of AI. We worry about deep fakes and social misalignment and telling people the wrong thing. So all of these things are aspects that might worry us. And so I'm sure sometimes we feel a little bit like this illustration. It comes from a story that was told to me when I was a little boy. So it's quite an old story about a little boy in Holland. You may know it. He saw a leak in, I'll call it a dam wall because what it was called then, currently today, seems to have a different meaning. But so he tried to block the hole with his finger, and then another hole started. So when we look at all of the risks facing us as organizations, we wonder, where do we start? How do we block this? How do we make sure that we are safe? And that's what I'm going to just try and propose to you today, is a framework-centered approach to managing risk in organizations. So let's just first of all talk about the relationship between security or cybersecurity, data governance, and data privacy, and then finally AI. So you'll notice that if you look at the illustration here, that every organization needs security. You do not have a choice. We all have to protect data and its misuse as one of our most important assets. If an organization doesn't recognize that data is essential to its business, then it is not a data-driven organization. So security is the minimum threshold. It is where we start. But built on top of that, we have the governance of our information, where in data governance, we try to ensure that we understand or know what data is in our organization, and we try to improve its quality and therefore better use of that data over time while protecting it. Data privacy focuses more on personal information and the protection thereof, and there are significant regulations around that. In the last 5 years, those regulations have exploded, and we are all subject to them. And it is very important that we recognize that without security, you cannot have data protection and privacy. And so the two are very closely hand in hand. And then we today have the emerging topic of governance of AI. Again, it's founded in security and an understanding of our data, but also about what information we allow to be going out into the world of AI. So what is a framework? Well, it can be described as a blueprint or a plan. It's something that you build the road ahead on, look at where you want to go, what actions you want to take. I prefer to think of a framework as a racetrack, and some of you might, if you're a MotoGP fan or one of those, you might recognize the Suzuka racetrack there. So if you look at all the little things sticking out the side, it's places where you've got to stop, it's places where there's an emergency exit if something goes wrong, there's places where you have to pull into the pits. And a framework is a lot like that, because the frameworks that we are looking at today are about implementing programs that never end. So you never start at one place and finish. So you don't start by mapping out your data and finish by managing it effectively. That's just a level of maturity. We have to continually keep up with those processes. And there are things that change in our organization. The way data is managed is changed. The way data is viewed and the regulations around that are changing. So we need to keep up with those changes, and the way to do that is to develop an appropriate framework. So the core aspects of a framework are, and I'm sorry the text doesn't come out too clearly, but so the first objective with the framework is make sure that you align with your organization's strategy. If you don't have a strategy, then I recommend you get one, but you can start governance anyway. So, but the first thing is be aligned with what your business is actually trying to do. Then what we want to do is to measure our framework in terms of the context and scope. So what regulations apply? Which area are you in? What does the local data protection regulation say? What are the regulatory aspects from in your industry from a financial services perspective? Then what we want to do is map out our organization's standards against that framework. So what standards does your organization have that you need to take care of? And then lastly, what we want to do is we want to map out who's participating in this framework. Who are the role players? What should they be doing? Who leads this program that we are defining the framework for? And then what are the activities that we will engage in along the way? And normally a framework will tell you at each aspect of the governance framework that you're looking at what a key set of activities is. So today we're going to look at a few examples of frameworks. But before I go on to that, it's very important that a framework without policy, without some sort of definition of how you are going to implement this, is going to be meaningless. So just having a framework, a document that says this is how we value privacy, it's not going to be sufficient. What you also need as a separate component is how you're going to implement it, who are the stakeholders, who are the role players, and then very importantly, what are the risks that you expect to encounter along the way? So if you think of data privacy or think of cybersecurity, what are those risks? It's not something you need to think up for yourselves. There are industry standards that are already defined that will help you to do that. And then very importantly, we want to also define how do you measure success. Because if you're implementing something and the regulator comes and says, well, show me how successful you are in your data privacy program, or show us how successfully you are managing credit risk. How do you measure that? What are the outputs, the KPIs that you present? So let's look at a few frameworks, and we'll just look at the international examples that you can use to bring into your organization. We're going to look at three primary areas: cybersecurity, data governance, data protection, and privacy, because they are the most relevant to one of your most important assets. Aside from your customers and your employees, data is your most important asset. And then we'll also just have a brief glance at risk management and AI governance just for reference. Okay. So the first thing I'd like to share with you is there is enough internationally certified best practice principles and frameworks. There are enough out there for you to be able to leverage that. So don't try and start from scratch. Use what is out there, align with the regulation. Sometimes you can use regulation as your framework. So in many cases with data privacy, some organizations say, we're going to go by the GDPR or POPIA or the Kenya Data Protection Law, okay, as our framework. Often it's best to bring in some other aspects as well. And then adapt them to your organization. So make them specific to your capabilities. It's no good adapting or adopting a framework that is not possible for you to achieve. You don't have the people, you don't have the skills, you don't have the things that it is highlighting as part of its risks. And then, so take that best practice, make it your own, and then build on that. So let's just start with cybersecurity. Is there knowledge out there that we can leverage from? So I've just listed a few of the top cybersecurity frameworks out there. The one that many of you might know is ISO 27001, 27002. It's an internationally recognized standard. It's not necessarily a framework that organizations can adopt and that they can become certified for. It is a security management system framework, and it comprises a number of disciplines extending into cybersecurity, into privacy as well. And it works on a 4-plan cycle. We then have the NIST cybersecurity framework, one of the most respected cybersecurity frameworks. Just for your information, NIST is the National Institute of Systems and Technology in the USA. The NIST frameworks are targeted at public organizations in the USA, but they are made available free of charge as international frameworks. So the NIST cybersecurity framework is perhaps one of the most respected frameworks out there. Then you've got SOC 2, which is for service organizations. You've got the CIS controls, over 240 of them. And then we've got the COBIT framework, the control objectives for business and information technology. They are all, and each of those frameworks that you see there also delves into areas such as privacy and into principles that we can extend into other areas such as data governance. So the first step is to take those frameworks and build your best practice principles that map to your organization. So that's the first step. So we would map it, we'd align, we'd make sure we document it and have that signed off and understood by our stakeholders, and then we want to make sure it is communicated. And we'll repeat those for the others. So if we look at privacy, there are so many privacy frameworks out there that it's mind-boggling. Okay, but the good part is they all follow very much the same principled approaches. But I just want to tell you about a few of them. So we've got ISO 27701, which is part of the ISO 27000 series, and an organization can achieve that certification. We have the GDPR. You might have your own local regulations, so the Kenyan Data Protection Law, the South African POPIA, and many countries in Africa have their own data protection law. There are very few that do not anymore. So we can use them as compliance-directed frameworks. We have the Fair Information Practice Principles or Process Principles. There's a framework from the International Association of Privacy Professionals, as well as from the Association of International Chartered Professional Accountants. We've got the ISO 29001. We've got generally accepted privacy principles, etc. You get the picture. They all have very similar approaches. They provide rights to the data subject, the respect, or the balance between the need to store and know information versus the rights of the individual, human rights of the individual. And they also place legal obligations on organizations that are processing personal information to manage that with care and comply with specific requirements. So again, what we can do is we can take those best practice principles, put them together into something that aligns to our organization so that we can govern privacy and the protection of personal information. Just remember again, both in all of the frameworks, is that the first foundation is you have to have security. So we cannot have data privacy without sound security in our organization. Then from a data governance perspective, it's interesting to me that there are less formal frameworks for data governance than there are for cybersecurity and for privacy. However, the most widely accepted of them is the DAMA DMBOK, or Data Management Body of Knowledge. It's actually a set of guidance principles, and you see the wheel illustrated there, for different practice areas of data management, the central of which is data governance. So data governance is deemed to be at the heart of anything you do around data. It will inform it, and it relies on those. So when we implement programs for data governance, you'll see aspects like data quality management, metadata management. We rely on these principles, but we also build out a series of activities that you would need to do or to perform to properly implement the governance of data. And I just want to make one point, is that the governance of information is a corporate responsibility. It is part, if you look at in South Africa, we have the King 4 guidelines. Okay, it's part of the responsibility of the board, governing body of the organization, to oversee the implementation of the governance of information, of data information. If we're governing data, we are governing the use of that as information in the organization. So what you see illustrated on the bottom of that picture is an illustration of the data governance framework that we have put into the National Data Governance Framework for Rwanda. It's one that we use as part of our organization because it contains a series of activities aligned to certain best practices. So again, from a data governance perspective, pull in those best practices, but make it practical to your organization. There are some non-negotiables when it comes to data governance. And then there are, so we call them the hard principles, and then we have the soft principles. So for instance, there has to be leadership if you are going to govern anything. Okay, so that's a hard principle. You cannot say, well, we'll publish a framework and we just hope like heck everyone will stick to it. Okay, so there needs to be leadership, there needs to be some accountability, there needs to be assignment of responsibility, and there needs to be some sort of structure to what you do. And then there are core activities like quality management. So quality information is a core principle, a core objective of data governance. I often use the example of when you have a baby in your house, and I'm sure many of you have children, most of you have had children. When that baby comes home from the hospital, we don't put it in the cot and say, well, I'll just wait till he changes his nappy. Okay. Or when he's a little toddler, we let him out into the garden and wander over to the pool and say, well, I'm sure he'll teach himself to swim. And when it goes to school, we just say, I don't care who your friends are, stay out as late as you want. If you don't want to learn, it's fine. Don't eat. If you don't want to eat it, we won't make you eat it. We don't do that. Well, most of us don't do that. Why? Because we want our children to grow up to be productive, quality members of society, and also something that reflects well on us as parents. And it's the same with data. See, data is one of your most valuable assets. If you just leave it and hope ultimately that the IT guys will sort it out, okay? So we have this, throw it over to the wall to IT and they'll fix it. And you know what happens is that your data scientists, your people that cost you a lot of money are spending 80% of their time just trying to fix poor quality of data. So if we could start instilling those qualities early in the lifetime of our baby data, it means that when it gets to the point where we need to make decisions around it, it's already got the qualities instilled. It's already got the oversight. It's already been governed. Okay, so I don't want to preach too much. So some other considerations. The first is we need to recognize that all governance is founded in the management of risk. Okay, if you don't understand that you need to identify risk to govern, then you will not be governing effectively. So the reason we identify risk is so that we are not blindsided as organizations and we understand what actions we need to take. So when we define our programs for implementing governance, whether it's of cybersecurity, whether it's of data privacy, whether it's data governance, do not try to reinvent the risk approach. Okay. You already have a risk department in your organization. You already have compliance professionals. You already have legal professionals. They are your strongest allies in implementing governance programs. So work with them. Don't try and reinvent your own risks and your own risk management framework. They've already probably done that. You might just be able to supplement those or to add a new dimension if necessary. And then the other aspect that we just need to be aware of is that AI is becoming more and more prevalent, and there are a growing number of standards and regulations around AI. We have an AI policy here. In Rwanda, they have an AI policy. The EU has just passed an AI law. And when I heard you talking about credit scoring, my ears perked up, because one of the things that's banned in the new AI, the EU AI Act, is social credit scoring. Now, it's not exactly what you were talking about, but it's a bit of a knee-jerk reaction to what's happened in China, where people and again, there's some misinformation about it, but where people are scored based on how they behave socially. So where, if you do certain acts in certain ways, you get a negative ranking. It's a bit like the proposed thing on our driving licenses, but that sort of thing. And that's banned by the EU AI. Social credit scoring is not allowed. So there are certain things that are high risk and certain things are banned. And as AI starts being used in your organizations, you should be prepared, because I can guarantee you that someone in your organization, and perhaps even you, is using ChatGPT, okay, or Bing AI, or Google Gemini to build a presentation. I can promise you Google or ChatGPT were not consulted in this presentation. So bringing it all together, this is what we would ideally like to see in a properly governed organization. We want to see the framework in cybersecurity. We want to see on that foundation that we are building our data governance programs, our data privacy programs, and possibly our AI governance capabilities. With all of that leveraging off our ability to identify and manage risk before it happens and know how we should mitigate it. Sorry, that was just my backup slide in case the colors look right. So I've got 2 more slides. I did promise to talk for 20 minutes. So just some implementation considerations. The first thing is, when you define the framework, it's not there as an academic document. It's meant to mean something to your organization. What we need to understand, though, and this, we often get this misconception. People say, well, we're starting a data governance project. Okay. It's not a project. Okay. Because it will never end. It should never end. If you're teaching your child quality, it doesn't stop when they're 5 years old. Okay, when they're 10 years old, you carry on. And even once your children leave your house, you still worry about them, and you still phone them, and you still sometimes preach to them and get them angry. It happens to me a lot. But the important point is that we use these frameworks to create programs in our organization. They are ongoing, self-improving programs that we measure and we adjust as we need to. The second thing is you have to have the sponsorship and involvement of your executives. Without that, so if your leadership do not believe in data governance or in cybersecurity, they shouldn't be there, or in data privacy programs, then it won't succeed. It will have limited impact in your organization. So you really need those champions to help you to engage the organization. And make sure as part of setting up your programs that you have got the right support around you. Get the stakeholders involved from across the business. Get your HR, head of HR, get your head of finance, get them involved, because they will be the ones that will take your program further. Okay, and then make sure you use existing capabilities, as I've mentioned. Leverage what you have, don't try and reinvent the wheel. And then when you're implementing, this is the part where the project comes in. You start small. So find 1 or 2 use cases that you know will have an impact. So in your world, so maybe there's an area where you know there's a big problem because we're getting the wrong output and it's because of poor quality data. We'll start there. So like that missing data example that you mentioned, I immediately wanted to stick my hand up and said, we can fix that. Okay, because if you start, for instance, with data governance and trying to implement those quality principles, trying to understand what's the root cause of poor quality and trying to address it at its root, you start impacting the ability of the organization to make faster, better decisions. And then, very important that you know where your data lies. I've just been to an organization where I spoke to people, they're very well organized, and then I spoke to someone who'd left the organization. He said, I can tell you, there's a system there that I still have access to and no one knows it exists. Okay, it's got a lot of sensitive information in it. But that's what happens, you know. Someone new comes along, forget about that. We don't bother about access control, and the next minute it's on the dark web. And your company is scrambling to try and beat off the wolves that are coming for you. communicate and measure. Those are the last 2 points that I'd like to measure or to mention. So thank you very much. I'd like to invite some questions, if I may.
Let's give Alan a round. Thank you, thank you. Any questions for Alan?
Okay.
No questions. Thank
So
you.
can I ask a question of the audience? I'd like to ask a question of the audience. If you need to share data with another organization, and that data contains personal information, do you need to get the consent of the data subject?
Again is a yes.
Categorically, I've got a yes. And I'd like to say not always. And this is where an understanding of the principles of data protection come in. So for instance, if you're a government organization and you're sharing information with another government organization and there's a legal basis for doing it, you don't need to get consent. Similarly, if you're a financial services organization and as part of delivering your contract, you need to share that information, for instance, with a regulatory body, a body that confirms certain details for you. You don't need consent. You just need to understand what the legal basis is under which you're operating. So, and that's where the governance aspect comes in. It's about creating that understanding and that awareness. So, thanks. I got my little bit in there. If there are no more questions, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Alan.